to Solosaurus, a podcast about one-player board and card games. My name is Brandon Waite.
My name is Carter Mackey.
And this is episode 18, where we're going to be talking about the hottest game in the hottest genre right now, Welcome to. But for now, let's talk about the news. The first really big piece of news this week is that Chip Theory Games, who are famous for games like Too Many Bones and Hoplomachus, which we'll have a review of one day because, spoiler alert, I really, really like it. They have their next big box game on Kickstarter right now called Cloudspire. And this is a big deal because Chip Theory puts out very few games, and when they do, they're always done really well with nice big heavy poker chips and neoprene mats, which give the game a really cool quality feeling without miniatures. So this is their take on tower defense MOBA style games. It's like all these floating islands with these very different asymmetrical races are suddenly colliding together because the energy that held them apart for so long is waning. And now once they crash together, they're fighting one another. But they're also building portals so they can bring in soldiers from the ground up to fight in their war. It's very cool, very epic looking, and it's going to have a solo campaign out of the box.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's very cool. They've always had high regard for solo play and included it. And I don't think you've played any of their games yet, Triplock or Hoplomachus.
No, haven't had a chance yet.
Well, we're going to very soon. So keep your ears open for some Chip Theory Games reviews. But if you're interested in this at all, check it out on Kickstarter. That is Cloudspire from Chip Theory Games. Actually, that's going to be kind of a recurring theme for this news section because even though Essen is just around the corner, there aren't any big announcements yet for new games, at least new solo games that I've heard of. So all the big news right now is on Kickstarter, and that brings us then to the new Spirit Island expansion, Jagged Earth, which is making people crazy with excitement. I have not played this game yet. Spirit Island is the game where you play a bunch of island spirits that are repelling settlers that have come to farm the land, which the game describes as blight. It's an amazing theme. I'm all about us trying this at some point.
Yeah, ever since I heard about Spirit Island, I've really, really wanted to play it.
Oh man, me too. And this new expansion is a big box, and it adds a bunch of new playable spirits, which is what people really want. So I can't tell from the Kickstarter page if it adds that many new mechanics to the game, but just adding more to the game is a very cool concept and something that a lot of people are really going to like. So if you like Spirit Island, you should check out the new expansion. Our third game is another Kickstarter game, and that is Tidal Blades from Druid City Games. This is a big deal because it's been getting hyped for a long time, and because it has art from the world of Mr. Cuddington, which is a husband-wife duo that have done the art for Santorini and the new brass editions that look really, really sharp. This is a bright, vivid world where you play people who live in a beach reef kind of society, and a big fold has opened up, a rip in space-time or whatever, where monsters are coming out of the fold. So you are a Tidal Blade, somebody who is gearing up to fight these things for points and glory, but mostly the points. And so this is a dice worker placement game where you have these dials on your home board that you crank up over the course of the game to make your die rolls better. It's a pretty cool engine building dice worker placement game. It looks gorgeous. I mean, one of the prettiest games I've seen in a long time. It will cost you, but if you're interested in that, you can check that out on Kickstarter, and they just unlocked a solo mode for that. No details that I've seen on what that actually entails, but Druid City Games have a reputation for making really great quality titles, so you definitely want to check that out if you're interested in their stuff. Our fourth game to mention to you this week is another Kickstarter title, and this one is a little bit different than what you would expect to hear about on this show. This is called Mezzo, and Mezzo is from Colossal Games, which is the new publisher that is taking over everything right now, it feels like. They are creating a Blood Rage style, knife fight in a phone booth kind of area control game that's become very popular. It reminds me a lot of Blood Rage and Rising Sun, although mechanically I do think it has some significant differences there. But it does have this cool South American deity kind of theme to it. And it looks really interesting. What's pretty cool about this is the first big box title from John Cloudis, who was formerly with Small Box Games, which was recently sold to Colossal Games. And he's famous for games like Omen, A Reign of War, which was a really big hit for him on Kickstarter, actually multiple times now. And he wanted to try his hand at a big box game. So this is it. Has these big, cool Mesoamerican deity miniatures that you're moving around the board, and it looks really neat. The Kickstarter for this one actually just ended, but I mention it here because, of course, it will hit retail, and Colossal's MO has been in the past to not have Kickstarter exclusive items. And so you'll at least get something very similar to what was on Kickstarter at retail. So if you're interested in that, check it out because this has a solo mode in the box. This is not the kind of game that you would expect to have a solo mode, but it's something that was unlocked during the Kickstarter campaign, and I'm really anxious to see what that's like because I'm just curious how one of these games would play solo. So
yeah, nothing I guess intuitively sticks out of how you would make that work, but yeah, I'd be interested to see.
Yeah, I feel the same. Want this to be something they can pull off because I want somebody else to superimpose it over my copy of Blood Rage so that I can play that solo. And that is Mezzo from Colossal Games. Our final title for today is the one that seems to have everybody excited for at Essen, apart from the normal Uwe Rosenberg releases anyway. This is Underwater Cities from Vladimir Suchi or Suki. It's a hard name to pronounce, but what I do know is that he is a really hot designer right now. He had Pulsar 2849 come out last year, which is a big hit at Essen. Really cool dice drafting and placement sort of game that was set in space that got a lot of love. And this is a game about building cities underwater. And I don't know why, but it strikes me as odd that this has not really been done very much.
Yeah, it's a great idea.
Yeah, I think it's very cool. And it's supposed to be a heavy Euro game, a card placement kind of Euro engine building game, which is right up my alley. Mm-hmm. And the theme just makes it even cooler. So this is something to keep your eye on because it has solo right out of the box, which is something I'm very excited about. And I would just be anxious to see how that works in the solo experience because the box says that it plays in 30 minutes per player. And if you're playing one player, I'm really hoping that it still means 30 minutes. So anxious to check that out. That is Underwater Cities from Delicious Games. And that's all that we've got for you in the news this week. So we're going to get right to our review for this episode, which is for Welcome To. Welcome To is designed by, oh no, here's another name I'm going to have to pronounce. This is Benoit Turpin?
That's what I would guess.
Okay. Well, Carter's from Louisiana, so he's more likely to recognize how to pronounce these names.
No, people just speak bad French in Louisiana.
Oh, okay. Well, I'm going to trust your judgment anyway. This is from Blue Cocker Games and Deepwater Games in the US, and this is a roll and write game. Or maybe roll and write isn't really the right term here because you don't actually have any dice. It's a draw cards and write game. And these are really, really hot right now in the industry. There have been so many of these that have come out in the last couple of years. And the basic idea for all of them is that you roll dice or draw cards, and you use the information that you get from these to write numbers or draw lines on a piece of paper that is your player board for the game. And it's very compact and easy to set up. And this one is no different. What sets this one apart is that it actually has a theme that seems like it's integrated into the game pretty well. And a lot of these don't really seem to have that. In this game, you're playing as an architect who's working to build the best new town in the 1950s United States, and you're doing so using that roll and write sort of format, or draw and write, I guess, in this case. You're building houses and fences and pools and parks in order to make the nicest neighborhood that you can, and it has a solo mode right out of the box. And in fact, one of the things that's compelling about this game is that on the box it says you can play with 1 to 100 people. And it says 100 because that's how many sheets there are in the box. Truth is that if you had a way to show the cards that you're going to be looking at every turn, this actually would scale perfectly up to that number.
Yeah.
There's nothing stopping you from playing with this many people if you really wanted to. And the solo mode is pretty cool.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it a whole lot.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to talking about the gameplay, but first we'll just talk about the components. And here's another area where this really stands out. These have the prettiest pieces of paper that I've seen in any roll and write game so far.
Yeah, it's just really nice, just full bleed, like sheets of paper of top down of a neighborhood. I don't know why this hasn't been done more in this genre of just illustrating the pad that you're writing on.
I don't either. I mean, there's some of that out there, but nothing like this. And not only is it well illustrated, and it keeps that sort of 1950s vibe in small ways on the piece of paper, like in the font and sort of the welcome to sign in the upper left corner. But it adds just some little extra things on top of the function that I think are really cool, like a place for you to name your town on every sheet of paper. Mm-hmm. It's just a nice little touch, and a very easy way to take the numbers that you're writing over the course of the game and score them at the end, all built right into the sheet in a way that feels pretty nice and organic.
Yeah.
And the cards themselves that come in the game that you're going to be drawing they're not mind-blowing, but they're nice, sturdy cards. They're simple artwork, but pretty and engaging. Mm-hmm. And each one of them has a picture of a house with a number on it. Mm-hmm. And those are the numbers you're going to be using during the course of the game.
Like an address number.
Yeah, like an address number. And then each number has its own sort of special picture associated with it, like an extra thing that's sort of tacked on to the house. Did you notice that on these cards?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so like all the 14s have a picture of like a flag or something next to the porch. These are small details, but when you're talking about a package that is very small and portable here, you want something that's put together well and that clearly has a lot of thought put into it. I think that shows up here.
Yeah, absolutely.
So very few components, but what's in the box are really nice. And again, a nice big pad of paper with 100 sheets. So you'll have a lot of plays of this game. And if you really wanted more, the files are available on the website, so you could just download them. So components are great, and the rules are also pretty good.
Yeah, it just doesn't take long, I guess, to get through it at all, or like the solo rules barely changes anything.
And a lot of it is pretty thematically grounded. There are some weird disconnects for how different mechanics function in game.
Right, yeah.
That make it a little bit hard to get down, but we'll talk about those in a little bit more detail in just a few minutes. The one thing that I thought was a little weird about the rules is actually related to the components. In the component list and the setup list, it says that all the players will need pencils, and then it says that those pencils are not included in the box. But they are. There's a pack of pencils right there in the box, and I don't know, it just struck me as odd that it said they aren't in there, and yet here they are.
Yeah, I mean, it feels strange to even mention that pencils wouldn't be included, even if they weren't included, because, I mean, of all the score pads I've had in games, they've never made a point to say, oh, and by the way, you'll need to supply your own pencil if you want to score on this pad.
Yeah, surely they just must be thinking that because this is actually core to the function of the game, they want to mention it here. I'm just telling you, Deepwater Games, you don't have to include the pencils. In fact, I would recommend not actually using pencils with this game because the full color sheets make pencil a little bit harder to read, at least for me. So I use a pen or, in some cases, a Sharpie, which I know is a little bit barbaric, but I really like it. It makes me feel good. So,
those are thick numbers you have written on that one.
They are thick numbers, but it's pleasing to me. And so I just went that route. It's a small, weird thing, and it's not a negative thing. I just mentioned it here because I thought it was funny. I actually laughed out loud when I was reading the rules because I thought, I could have swore I saw a packet of pencils in here somewhere.
Yeah, I thought the same thing because, as I opened the box and took everything out, I'm like, oh, here's these cute little golf pencils, and kept reading. It's like, oh, and there's not pencils in here. And I was like, well, there are.
I feel like there are.
Right.
Yeah. And it's just such a minor, silly thing. The rules are really well done. And the solo rules are really well done, too. They're very close to the base game rules. The only real major difference is that over the course of the game, and this will get us into play here a little bit, you will have 3 different goal cards that are set out for you that are city plans, I guess. Different things the city would like to see you do with your neighborhood. And if you're the first person in a multiplayer game to get one of these cards fulfilled, you get the points for it, and then you flip it over. And there's an opportunity there for other players to still meet that goal and score points, but it's a lesser number of points than the player who did it first.
It's like, what, about half or something like that?
Yeah, I think it's usually about half. And in the solo game, of course, you can't really handle it quite that way because you're the only player at the table. Mm-hmm. So what they have you do is, instead of having 3 cards every round in 3 separate piles that you're picking from, you have one deck of all the cards combined, and you're drawing 3 cards from that, and you're going to pick 2 to use to write numbers on your pad every turn. And at some point, as you play this game, as you get down a little further into the deck, there's a little solo play card that's buried in there. And when you get to that, you're going to flip those city plans over. So basically, there's like a timer for how long you have to fulfill the better portion of those contracts to get a better score for this game.
Right. And you have a rough idea of where that's going to be.
Yeah. You don't know exactly, which is fun for me. I like that mechanic in games where you aren't quite sure where a card is buried, but you have a general idea.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, it creates some good tension here. But otherwise, the rules are very similar. The only difference at the end is that when you score, you're just trying to beat your own score. And this is one of the things that I felt like could have been handled a little bit better here, is in these kind of games, I really like when there's a listing of tiers for victory. You know, how do I know that my score of 67 on my first game is not a good score?
Right, yeah.
It isn't. It isn't a good score at all.
No, it's not. I remember when you told me that, or like we discussed some of our first games, and it was, yeah, that's not a good score.
No, it's not. It took me a while to break 100, and I think maybe you broke 100 on your first play.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know now that when you look in the box, there's a card that lists a bunch of achievements that you can keep track of. So like the first player to break 120 points, check this box here. And those achievements are broken into tiers. So I used that as a guide, I guess. You know, the top level of achievement said if you score 140 points, check this box. So I'm assuming that it is possible to score 140 points, even though I've not come anywhere near that at this point.
Yeah, because, I don't know, things like that I'm a little conflicted on, because on like one hand, whenever I guess that's all that's in a solo game, it's like, I don't know, chasing a high score doesn't, I don't really care about that, and that doesn't feel good, or it's not super compelling for most games the way it's done. But at the same time, I still do kind of like to have at least some reference point, like you said, of like, how bad did I do this first round, or like how lucky or good I did, you know, things like that.
Yeah, I would agree. It's definitely not the most compelling goal for me either, and I would prefer having like an opponent to play against. Although the downside of that is it gives you more to manage, you know, when it's not your turn. So the benefit here is this plays extra snappy. It's just not super compelling for me to come back and try to beat my high score. But the tiers do add a little bit of something there. And that little achievement sheet that comes in the box in general, that's pretty cool. Mm-hmm. And you can use that as a solo player, just checking off the things that you achieve over time.
Yeah. I kind of like the achievement, like when games include achievements for solo play. It's not like super compelling, but it's a fun little thing to do when you're going through different playthroughs.
Yeah, I feel about them about the same way I feel about achievements in video game consoles.
Right.
You know, I don't care about them that much, but some people are really going to care. And if you're one of those people, then you should just know these are in the box, and it's pretty cool. It just gives you a little something extra to aim for. But the play of the game itself is actually compelling enough for me to keep coming back to it. I've played this game several times now, and I'm fascinated by just how simple it is for what you do on your turn. Because on your turn, what you're going to do is look at 3 different cards, and each card has a number on one side from 1 to 15, or a picture on the other side. And you're going to use one of these 3 cards for the number and another one for the picture. And those 2 are going to be what you look at for putting on your sheet this turn. And so on your sheet, you have these 3 rows of houses, and your goal is you want to build the houses by writing numbers on the different houses on the sheet. The trick is the number that you pick on the card that you're putting on the sheet, you need to pick carefully because you have to write the numbers in ascending order, and numbers can't repeat themselves unless you get a special ability that allows you to do so. So You can skip houses in that row if you want to, but when you leave those spaces, you're kind of pushing your luck about whether or not you're actually going to get the numbers you need to fill up those spaces later on.
Yeah, it's a nice, I guess, it's not really push your luck, but it kind of feels like that in some ways of like, okay, I really want to put this house here, but that means I'm really taking a risk because I have to get this one number because that's all that will fit here, you know?
Yeah, which is light. It's not a heavy decision.
Right.
But it is sometimes a kind of stressful decision.
Right.
And because you just don't really know. It's a deck of cards. There's inherent randomness there. You're just sort of guessing based on what you've seen come out so far. This must be in here somewhere, you know? And the trick is that the numbers in the middle of that range are much more common than the numbers on the ends. The 1s and 15s are really hard to come by. So when you see those come up, you feel like you really need to grab one and put it on your map. And that's usually a pretty good decision. Other times you'll see those numbers and you'll also see the perfect number that you need to fill in the gap on one of your other rows. It's just a great little decision, I think.
Right. Not too stressful, but yeah, it just gives you enough pause to think about it. But you're going to be blown through these decisions pretty quickly. So it's got a really nice, I guess, rhythm to it.
Yes, and that's the core of the game, really. It's just putting the numbers on the houses. What turns this game up a notch is that in addition to a number, you're also picking sort of a symbol that is your, I guess, special ability or something that you're activating that round.
Right, kind of the action you're taking.
Yeah, the action. And there are a variety of those. So one of them is you can build a park. And when you build a park, you place the number that you've picked in one of the 3 rows on the houses there. And then each row has its own little park track. And so the more parks you build, the more circles you get to cross off on the park track, the more points you get at the end of the game. It's a pretty simple thing, but it does mean that when you pick a park, you've got to place it in the same row as where you put the number. And that can be pretty restrictive.
Right. And so, yeah, it kind of goes back to like, well, how much you really want to put a park on this one row. But that kind of puts you in a precarious situation with your like numbering on that row of homes.
Yeah, I really like that. And it will force you to kind of focus on rows that maybe you weren't going to care about this round, or pick a number that you care about less, just because those park rows can get you a lot of points if you fill them up.
Yeah, it really starts to add up. And I guess we should mention that the 3 different rows are 3 different lengths of homes. And the longer one is, for the parks, for instance, are worth a lot more. If you fill it up all the way.
Yeah, which is another very cool thing about this game. So you're always trying to decide which one of these rows do I think I can actually fill up so I can get more points for that. And we'll explain how in just a minute. But also these little extra actions add some great little crunch as well. I mean, you've got parks. You've also got pools. So some houses that are on the pieces of paper have pools sort of pre-planned to be part of that house. If you pick a pool card when you pick your number, if there's a pool at the house where you're going to place that number, then you can also circle the pool and say, hey, I'm building this pool for the house. And that's pretty cool because it gives you another track where you can cross off circles on the pool track. And the more pools you build in your neighborhoods, the more points you're going to get at the end of the game. It's pretty simple, but it's more restrictive than the parks.
Oh, yeah.
Like, very restrictive. So when you get a number and pool combination that work, you feel incredibly compelled to put that on the board, even if there are other options that might help you in other ways. I thought that was a pretty cool little option. There's also the temp agency cards, which are ways that, when you take the temp agency action with your number, you can raise or lower that number by 2, which I initially thought was just cool because you can have some more flexibility in filling up those gaps in your home rows. But you actually mentioned a pretty good point about how this actually raises your limit for the row.
Right. Yeah, because obviously you can't go into the negatives or 0, but you could push the number up into 17, which gives you a little bit more flexibility, especially on the longer row of homes.
Which is pretty cool. And so having that ability to give yourself more wiggle room by placing a bigger number on the end is really nice. Especially because those high numbers are really rare. And so filling in like the 11, 12, and 13 can be kind of tricky sometimes. Especially in that bottom row, which is the longest one.
Yes.
That's where it's really helpful.
So I think it's 12 homes and there's like 15 numbers.
Yeah, so there are 12 homes in the longest row and there's only 1 through 15 in the deck. So if you're going to fill up that row, you've got to be pretty careful.
Mm-hmm.
But then this suddenly gives you 2 more numbers to play with, which is a huge deal.
Yeah.
And on top of that, when you pick the temp agency, you also get to scratch out a little temp agency circle on that track. And for solo play, this is actually a little bit different than multiplayer. In multiplayer, if you've scratched out more of these than anybody else, then you're going to get the most points. Second person gets second most points. Third person gets third most. It's pretty standard multiplayer kind of Euro stuff. In the solo game, you either scratch out 7 of them for 7 points, or you don't get any points for it.
Which seems like a lot.
It seems like a lot to me too, and that means I don't end up going for this very often. But I can't tell you if that's actually a good decision or not, because I'm not actually good at this game.
Yeah, I mean, I would use it, but I would typically only use, I feel like 3 or 4 of those cards every time I would play, which isn't, I mean, it can get you more points if you're playing with other people, but taking one card 7 times for only 7 points seems a little on the low side.
Oh, yeah.
But also you do get the benefit of getting to move house numbers around.
That's true, but some of those other actions are so powerful and they can net you so many points at the end of the game. It's really hard for me to decide to chase that at the expense of other things.
Yeah, that's why I think I ultimately don't end up taking it that often.
Yeah, because one thing that we haven't mentioned so far is you definitely can't do everything in one game of this.
Oh, yeah.
So the choice of which things to concentrate on is a really interesting one, because when you get one of those pool and number combinations, you'll feel compelled to put one of those down. But if you haven't been chasing pools for the entire game, the payoff for that isn't going to be that great. If you put down one pool at the beginning of the game, then at the end, you're going to get 3 points. And that's not that much in this game when scores are often over 100. But if you put down several pools over the course of the game, the scores go as high as 36, which is that's a huge chunk of points.
I mean, I think you would have to put out every single pool for that, surely, right?
Yeah, I think you would, and that would be incredibly difficult to do. But if you were going for a pool kind of strategy, then that's a real possibility.
Yeah.
So choosing to focus makes that decision even harder from round to round, which I really like. Then there are a couple of things you would expect in a game about real estate. One action just lets you build a fence, which doesn't sound very exciting, but it's actually pretty cool, because over the course of the game, basically what you're going to be doing is taking these rows of homes and grouping them into groups of 1 to 5 by drawing fences around them. And that can be helpful for you for a couple of reasons. One is that a lot of those city plan cards, those goal cards, want you to have, 2 groups of 2 houses or 3 groups of 4 houses, something like that. And that's how you can get points that way. But the other reason is that another action in the deck is the real estate action. And this one I thought was really cool because it lets you choose which grouping of houses you want to earn you more points at the end of the game. And what I mean by that is when you start the game, if you have a group of 1 house at the end of the game that's sectioned off by a fence, you're going to get 1 point for that group. But over the course of the game, you can scratch off other numbers on that 1 house row, and that will get you 3 points for every 1 house grouping at the end of the game. So you can make each of your groupings more valuable. So in one game that I played, my groupings of 5 houses were worth 5 points at the beginning of the game, which isn't bad. It's a good chunk of points, but I made them worth 10 by the end, and that racked me up 40 points, which is a pretty huge deal.
Oh, yeah.
So it's pretty neat being able to choose how you're going to segment these different sections in your neighborhood. And it's not, again, a heavy decision, but it's a good one.
Yeah, it's just one of those things of just kind of slowly shaping your plan as you see kind of what the draw gives you, and then also what your little goals are. And just kind of setting it backup plans. Well, if I'm not able to accomplish these like city plan goals, well, I still have, a bunch of like 3 house size estates. And so I'll like bump those points up and get more points at the end.
Yeah, the idea of assigning value to your groups is pretty cool. Deciding how many points you want things that you care about to be worth is a good idea, and I like that in this game. And so that covers almost everything except the weirdest action in this game, which is BIS, which we discussed before we started recording, and it turns out that BIS, it doesn't make any sense to me as I look at this game sheet, but it's apparently Latin for twice. And I guess maybe this is a real estate term somewhere.
Yeah.
But to me, it makes no sense. I wish they would have changed this action name somehow. But the action itself is pretty cool. It lets you duplicate a number right next to an existing number in one of your rows. So if you have a 6 in your row and you're sort of wishing that maybe you had left yourself a little bit more wiggle room in that row, you can just duplicate that number. And that's pretty nice because it helps you to fill in your rows. What's really cool about it, though, is that you won't be able to fill up all 3 of your rows if you don't use this action. So if you want to be able to fill up houses, you need to take that bis action to add some duplicate numbers. The downside to adding them is that at the end of the game, for every time you've taken this action, you're going to get more and more negative points. And that I did not realize the first time I played the game. And it's not like it was a missing rule or something. It's just that I'm an idiot and I missed it in the rule book. But I was just taking this action over and over on my first sheet like, man, some people say that this game is so hard to fill up these different rows. I'm just killing this thing. Well, I took that action a bunch of times, and then when I was calculating points, I realized I was going to lose 20 points for all of those bis actions that I took. And it still turned out to be worth it. I still made some extra points off of that, but it wasn't nearly enough to justify all the other actions I could have taken.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's the negative points you get for that is more reasonable for the first couple of actions you take, but it starts ramping up pretty fast past that.
Yeah, and so you actually, at some point, after you've taken it a couple of times, I found myself doing the math for like, okay, can I justify taking this action? Is it actually going to get me enough points to make up for this cost and then some? I don't know. I thought that was a really neat little mechanic to add in here, and one that added more thinking than I thought it would. And the only other place where you can get negative points is if you can't actually put in a number on your turn. You know, if all the numbers that you've picked out from those 3 cards, none of them work in your neighborhoods, then you mark on a little track that you couldn't put it in. And that's one of the ways the game could end, is if you fill up that track with cards that you couldn't put into your neighborhood.
Which is only 3.
So you do have to plan carefully. But I just didn't find it to be that big of a deal.
Yeah, I mean, that only really came into play whenever the game was basically over. And felt like it didn't, I guess, catch you off guard. I was like, well, the game needs to end.
Yeah, I felt that way. The game doesn't outstay its welcome at all, even if you don't fill up that track.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it runs a good amount of time, and I don't know. I'm pretty bad at games, but I feel like I was able to judge about how much room to leave between houses in a row so that I could make room for other cards, and it just didn't turn out to be a problem that I ran into very often.
Yeah.
So, but if this is a challenge for you, just know that that's something that's there and that can cost you points at the end of the game. So that's really it. I mean, the solo game is so streamlined and easy, and we've already mentioned the fact that if you get down to that solo card during the course of the game, you know, you're going to flip those city plan cards to the other side, so that can get you fewer points. So that's an extra thing to consider there. But otherwise, everything else is on the sheet itself, and it's just a very compact, quick to set up, fun to play game. Yeah,
like you said, just it comes up really fast, you know, for a solo game, and then you finish your game pretty quickly. And I would say, generally speaking, you'll probably, I would think at least 2 games in a row almost.
Yeah, 2 games in a row. I played 3 in a row my first time, and then another 2 in a row after that, and another session. And I think 2 in a row would be my normal go-to.
Mm-hmm.
But it's very quick, and it's not so brain burny that you're done afterward.
Right.
But it's not so light that you feel like you just did an activity instead of play a game. I do feel like I played a game when I got done with this.
Right. But I also feel like I could talk to someone at the same time as I played it.
Yeah, which is nice because in our game group, when we get together, which is pretty rare, we often play games where you can't really talk to each other during the course of the game. So it's nice to have a game that's that weight if you ever did play multiplayer, but for solo play specifically, it's just nice because at the end of the day, I mean, I've said this on here so many times, but at the end of the day, I come home, I'm tired from work, I have 2 toddlers, it's just a lot. And so by the time 9 o'clock rolls around, I'm feeling like I want to go to bed. And that's about the only time I would have to play a game most nights. This is a good weight for that. This is a good sort of relaxing thing for when I want a game, I pull it out, I play it in 20, 30 minutes. It takes me no time to set up, and it's just fun. And on top of that, the replayability is high in some ways. And by that, I mean that you have this big deck of cards, and drawing those cards each turn is what's going to determine what you have to work with. It's a very tactical game in that sense. And so the order that the cards come out is everything. Or maybe not everything. It's a lot. We do wish that it had some more different kind of neighborhood layout.
Yeah, just some kind of variability. And, I mean, there's probably overly convoluted solutions to this, and there's probably just simple solutions to just having multiple pads or different files you could download, I guess, and print out yourself. But yeah, I know that would help me want to come back to this game probably more often.
Yeah, I could see that. And if that's something that you think you would want, the timing of this episode is good because we didn't get this from the publisher. I just got it because I thought it looked interesting. But I just found out there's going to be a Kickstarter for this. And this episode should be going up on Friday, the 26th of October. And that means then that the Kickstarter for this will be starting in less than a week. I think it's supposed to start on Halloween. So check that out because they're going to have not only a reprint of this game, but they're also going to have some extras that you can add. It looked like maybe a new pad that was kind of Halloween themed, which is pretty cool.
Mm-hmm.
And I understand that it's not just the same pad, that maybe it will have some mechanical differences. And in a quick message exchange that I had with the publisher today, they said that there will be some additions in the campaign that are specific to solo players because they know that solo players really enjoy this game and that for some people that's the primary way they play it. So check out the Kickstarter for that if you're just interested in adding a little bit more replayability. But I have to say that even without that, I really love this game. It's not going to be my number one game of the year, but I really love how simple it is. I love that it's such an elegant design, everything from how the sheets are laid out to how simple the rules are. And when I sit down, I have fun. And that is, for me, the point of a game. There are some games that push the boundaries of what games can be and do, and that's great and that's exciting. But when I come home at the end of a long day, that doesn't make me pull a game off the shelf and get it to the table. It's whether I can have fun and whether I can handle the burden of the rules after the burden of everything else that's been put on me during the day.
And I would say almost in addition with this game in particular, that if you needed a refresher on the rules, it would take 20 seconds?
Yeah, which is a big deal because more and more, I feel like I have very short memory for rules and I have to revisit the rulebook every time. And often that's what keeps me from playing. Mm-hmm. There are many costs to buying a board game. There's a monetary cost, of course, of actually getting the game into your collection. But more and more, I feel the cost of learning the rules and relearning the rules and spending the time playing a game when you could be spending that time doing any number of other things, from playing other games in your collection to doing other things that you care about in your real life outside of games. And when I have a game like this that requires very little of me and the cost is low in all of those areas, I just know this is a game that's going to see lots of play. And it's not the sort of thing that I feel like, ooh, I'm going to play this, 10, 15 times in a row, or it's going to be the sort of thing that I just can't stop playing. But I will say that it does have a kind of addictive quality to it.
Yeah, I don't know if I would say it has the same addictive quality for me, but I did really, really enjoy and like the game when I played it.
I think it's fair to say that you can read the rules here or get that, 20-second sort of refresher, and you'll get another 3 to 4 plays out of it every time you do. For me, it's going to be the game that sits on my shelf, and I'm going to play it once every couple of months, 3 or 4 times in a row, and then put it away. And I'm not going to be itching to play it again. But when the moment comes along, I'm going to be really glad that I have it. And so I really love it for that reason.
I think that's the main place I differ a little bit with you is I've really liked playing this game. I really enjoy it. Though the experience isn't that different, I enjoyed playing it with other people also in addition to playing by myself. But I think when it came down to it, just down the road, when I will think about playing the game, I don't know if I'll ever really be able to pull the trigger. I don't know if it has quite enough draw. And I'm sure I would have, I would enjoy it if I did get it down. I just don't know that I would actually be able to initiate.
Yeah, that we definitely differ there because I can see this being the sort of game that calls to me at those moments where I've had a long day, and it just hits that sweet spot for me. And so from my perspective, we do a good, bad, and ugly assessment of every game that we talk about. This game has a lot of good components, setup time, quality of play time, and the amount of thinkiness that goes into that. The price is really good. It's got a very low MSRP, and all of that for me is great. The only things that I would say that are kind of a knock against the game is that I wish that there were some scoring tiers apart from that achievement card. I wish there were maybe more goals for me to shoot for besides just beating my own score. So there was more replayability, different pads and things. But it sounds like some of those things are already being addressed and are on their way. But that's it for me. There's nothing ugly about the game, and I don't have any other bad things to add. Are there any good or bad things that you would want to add here?
I mean, this sounds almost silly, but just I really, really, really like the pad in the paper, and it's just thick, bright, vivid colors. It's strangely satisfying just to have that and just be like writing on it. It's really, really great. I like it, and I would love to see more or alternate pads that have that same type of design and just like level of illustration. And yeah, so like everything, the small price, the footprint, it's easy to set up. It's like thinky without like wearing you out. I wish there was a little bit more. And I mean, I think for me, what keeps it from being a game that I just absolutely love is I wish there was more to vary up the gameplay, a little bit more randomness other than just having just the deck being set up differently or having different city plan cards you're going for. If there was some way to vary up the gameplay a little bit more or just have a little bit more of an alternate setup, I think I probably would be inclined to pull the game down.
Yeah, I could see that. I do agree with all those good points. I see the need for more replayability. And one thing that I would add here, and I don't know if you feel this way, but the feeling of crossing things off a list is something that I love in my day-to-day life anyway. This is crossing things off the list, the game, or maybe the whole genre. I don't know. But this game in particular is so good to me. When I look at the end of the game, to see almost everything crossed off and filled up feels really satisfying to me.
Oh yeah. And like whenever you finish off a row of something, you've maxed out the points for one section, feels great. Yeah, just the fact that I love the tactile feel, the way the the pages look, and I like writing all over it.
Yeah, and I feel productive at the end. And I have absolutely not been productive or helpful to anybody else in any way, except the people of this imaginary town, Pallet Town, which is what I'm looking at right now. Pokemon fans know the reference. I enjoyed building that town. I enjoyed the process of crossing things off. It's just a satisfying feeling. But yeah, replayability, it does suffer somewhat. So for me, though, I still really love this game. And if it were up to me alone, it would get the stomp of approval. But it sounds like we're not quite on the same page on this particular one.
No, yeah, I can't. Like, there's nothing ugly about this game to me. And I did enjoy it. But yeah, I think just the fact that it would be hard for me to keep playing the game in the future keeps me from, I guess, giving the stomp of approval.
Yeah, so this game is going to get the light tap of approval, which is not a real category, but it is a really good game.
Mm-hmm.
And it's something that if you're looking for a casual game to check out, you don't have a lot of money to spend. By default nowadays, I feel like I want to tell people, don't buy whatever game you're interested in buying, because the shelf life of games is very short nowadays, and I'm interested in games that are going to stand up. I can see this one holding up. It's not going to be the center of your game collection, but it's a really nice add and something you're going to get a lot of enjoyment out of.
I mean, if they add something else, or like with this new Kickstarter, if there's something that's like, oh yeah, I would like to try that out, I would like get it back out. And also I guess if people wanted to play it, I wouldn't like refuse or anything. It's not like I would have a bad time with it. I'm just thinking from a solo perspective. I think I would look at it on the shelf and I would decide to do something else.
Yeah, I would play it solo and enjoy it multiplayer because it does scale so well.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's such a solitary experience. I do feel like you're not really losing anything by playing it solo at all.
No.
But yeah, I think this is one I'll revisit again and again. So 2 different perspectives on this one. And that is part of the reason that we had this team up in the first place, because we both bring very different perspectives to solo games. And so hopefully this helps you decide if this is a game that's a good fit for you and your collection. And that's all we've got for this episode. If you haven't yet followed us on Facebook and Instagram, you should do that because we get new games in and we try to post pictures on there of what we're playing and what we're opening. So check that out. You can give us a review on iTunes, and that would help a lot of people to find us and follow us there. And if you haven't yet, go on to Board Game Geek and look for our micro badge. We have a cool little tiny dinosaur micro badge that tells everybody that you love the show. And now there are like 15 of us who have it. If you don't have yours yet, you should get one. And if you can't afford it, just send me a message. I'm on Board Game Geek, and I'll be happy to tip you the amount that you need to get it because it's really cool. And I want to flood Board Game Geek with the little yellow and purple dinosaur. But that's all for this episode. Until next time, I'm Brandon Waite.
I'm Carter Mackey.
And this is Solosaurus.